Welcome to this week's episode of Hope for the Mind. I want to talk about being a light to the world while struggling with social anxiety. Now, social anxiety can make witnessing feel overwhelming, but God hasn't called us to be silent. He calls us to shine. So in this episode, we're going to talk about social anxiety, what it is and how to deal with it, as well as how to be a witness when you don't feel comfortable talking to people. So the questions I want to answer today are, is social anxiety a sin? And is it wrong to be an introvert and not be comfortable talking to people? So let's break this down. So I'm going to start this off by telling you I have social anxiety big time. And I'm sure people often wonder how someone who does a podcast, teaches Sunday school, and has been a worship leader can possibly have social anxiety. So first, let's talk about what social anxiety is. So social anxiety, also known as social phobia, is more than just being shy. It's a deep fear of social interactions that can interfere with daily life. People with social anxiety often worry about being judged, embarrassed, or humiliated in front of others. From a psychological standpoint, social anxiety stems from a mix of genetic predisposition, environmental factors, and learned behaviors. The brain's amygdala, which processes fear, is often hyperactive in individuals with social anxiety. This leads to heightened stress responses in situations that others might find normal, like public speaking, meeting new people, or even making a phone call. Social anxiety manifests in both physical and emotional ways, and here are some common signs. Excessive self-consciousness in social settings, avoiding eye contact or conversations, fear of public speaking, physical symptoms like sweating, rapid heart rate, nausea, overanalyzing past social interactions, avoiding confrontation at all costs. These are all common signs of social anxiety. For me, it's a lot different now than it was when I was a kid and when I was a teenager. As far as I remember, I didn't just suddenly wake up with it, but it did start to develop around probably 9 or 10 years old. Prior to that, I didn't really care what anyone thought of me. I didn't care what I looked like, if my clothes matched, if I was being silly, or if I had to say what caused it or started, I think it would be possibly lots of little things. It was the kids making fun of me in my class because I wore skirts. It was the teacher who humiliated me in front of the whole class and took my belongings and threw them in the trash because she thought I was distracted. It was possibly the fact I had ADHD and didn't know it until high school. I was easily distracted. I talked a lot, but in class, so I was often the bad kid. I focused best when I was doodling, and teachers often frown upon that. It was around that age that I started to notice that I didn't really have many friends. Being a slightly odd, inattentive, apostolic kid in a public school made it difficult to connect, especially when I was getting sent out of class for talking, and I was one of only a few kids that had glasses by the 3rd grade. I was regularly asked if I was Amish. I was called Skirt Girl, Four Eyes, Pizza Face, the one who talks all the time, etc., etc. And while I certainly don't consider this bullying, it did make me wonder at times if there was anyone who did like me. I didn't like the feeling of being rejected or made fun of, so I started going out of my way not to put myself in positions where that would be possible. I wouldn't walk up to talk to someone I didn't know because it was too likely of a chance for them to look at me and say, I already have friends. I would wait for someone else to come talk to me, but that was rare. But at least I knew they didn't care if I was weird or wore skirts all the time or talked a lot. I would go out of my way to not volunteer for anything and try to hide myself so I wouldn't be called on in school. This was to avoid embarrassing myself in front of everyone and further solidifying my position as the world girl. I would sit in the back of the class hoping the teacher wouldn't notice I existed and call on me, or notice that I was struggling to pay attention. Going into middle school, I convinced my mom to start homeschooling me, and I thought that would be so beneficial for my social anxiety. I didn't have to talk to anyone I didn't know. I didn't have to socialize, or so I thought. My lack of friends left me hanging out with my brother's friends, who were all 3 to 4 years older than me, And I was old enough to know that no one likes their younger sibling hanging around, so I knew I didn't fit in, but I also knew as long as I didn't embarrass them, they would let me stick around. So again, I made myself as invisible as possible. Eventually, I'd like to believe that they slowly became my friends as well, but by that point, I had convinced myself they were only my friends because of my brother. So I constantly held them at arm's length. During this time, my pastor had called on me to sing in church, and I was always taught you don't say no to the man of God. So I said yes. I felt sick to my stomach at even the thought of getting up and singing, but I said yes anyways. And I remember the first time I was so nervous, I was sweating. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking, and I know my voice was shaking. I was not about to make a fool of myself, so I practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. And then I got up and I sang through the shaking and the nausea. Luckily, I had a pastor who believed in giving children a chance to do things in the church, even if they messed up, sounded silly, looked silly, or even wasn't wearing their Sunday best. So even though I know everyone heard the shaking in my voice, he still clapped for me, told me afterwards that I did a great job, and told me to be prepared to sing that song again. I was shook, literally. I was so proud of myself. I gained the tiniest ounce of confidence. And the next time he called me up, I marched up there and started singing, ignoring the nervousness. And then I completely forgot the entire second half of the song. I was destroyed. I cried for days and told my mom I was never singing in church again. He did call on me again, though, and again, and again. And then eventually, he called on me to lead worship. You would think by then the nervousness went away, but no, not a bit. I still felt nervous and sick to my stomach every single time, but I just kept doing it. Later, he would eventually make me Sunday school teacher. Then somehow I accidentally became the Sunday school director. Then I was the one leading worship for several years. Now, going into college, I was forced out of my comfort zone a lot. I still wouldn't talk to anyone freely. I was invited to some study groups and took advantage of those. Getting my first job, my manager even noted how visibly nervous I was, but took a chance on me and hired me anyways. Of course, I learned to talk to people at that job. I was drawing blood, and you kind of have to explain things to people before you stick a needle in their arm. So I did kind of pick up a little bit more of an ability to talk to people without feeling like I was going to throw up. By my second job, I had to learn to talk even more. I was literally tasked to talk to every individual who came into the emergency room. That was my job. Now, by my third job, I had started working in a psychiatric facility where talking to people is literally required. You have to talk to them enough to be able to detect if their mood had declined or their demeanor had changed, even in the slightest, tiniest bit. I constantly ask myself, what a shy, introverted, anxious person like me was doing in these kinds of jobs. I would love to say that I just grew out of social anxiety, but I most certainly did not. I still deal with it every single day. I've learned to mask it, which isn't exactly the healthiest way to deal with it. So going into the first day on the job at the psych hospital, I had to go into a room full of people I had never met, be paired up with someone I didn't know, and then trust those same people to have my back. I was nervous and anxious and worried. What if they didn't like me? So they left me to dry with these psych patients. What if I talk too much? What if I laugh too loud? What if I get on their nerves asking questions? What I found out, though, is that as many times as someone didn't like me or didn't understand me, there was always someone who did. There were people who thought I laughed too loud and was obnoxious. As a matter of fact, one of the hospital directors went to my director when I was working in the ER, complaining that I laughed too loud. Now, my director, knowing I was a consistent, hardworking employee, told her, and I quote, "I'm sorry your employees don't enjoy their job and mine does." There were also those people who liked me equally as much as they were annoyed with me. The individuals who I got paired up with for training at the psych hospital ended up becoming close friends of mine, and they didn't care that I laughed too loud until I risked waking a difficult patient. They didn't mind that I talked too much, but there were times when she wanted to take the filing away from me because I was taking way too long. They put up with my obsessive need to reorganize the entire hygiene closet, but they were also there for me, tag teaming patient checks while overseeing someone in distress. We were there for each other when one of us said, "Hey, I need a break from this one-to-one." My nighttime supervisor would tell me she can't lose me probably as many times as she joked about firing me. So if I have learned anything about my social anxiety, it's that if a group of people don't like you and can't tolerate you, It's because you're hanging around the wrong group of people. Like I said, now I still struggle. To this day, I find it very difficult to talk to new people. I'm not a hugging type of person. I don't deal with others' tears very well. I find group settings to be very awkward. Crowds, stadiums, busy stores, they all make me feel overwhelmed and overstimulated. Getting up in front of groups of people to sing or especially talk, I find myself rehearsing what I'm going to say a million times. So I wouldn't say that my social anxiety has gotten better. I've just learned ways to make it not as obvious. I overplan and overthink everything I do and say. So if I'm going to talk in front of a bunch of people, I ask my husband beforehand, how does this sound? Would it be weird if I said this, etc.? I also still take criticism very harshly. There have been many times when someone has used criticism as encouragement, but to me, it just sounds like a put down. Even some you can do it moments make me feel like if I can't do it, then I'm a total failure. So I don't take confrontation very well. But moving on, I want to talk a little bit about this and how it relates to Christians and witnessing. So for Christians, social anxiety can create unique challenges in areas like evangelism and public prayer, or even just engaging in church fellowship. However, it doesn't mean you can't be an effective witness. So to answer the question of, is having social anxiety and social awkwardness a sin, and is being introverted wrong? The answer is no. God works through our weaknesses, and there are ways to share your faith that align with your personality and comfort level while still stepping out in faith. Even when Moses stood at the burning bush talking to God in Exodus 3 and 4, expressing his lack of speaking skills and his nervousness to talk, he literally told God he was not eloquent with words and was slow of speech. While yes, God was frustrated with him because he knew he would be there to give Moses the words to speak, but until Moses was able to figure that out, God did offer him an alternative through Aaron. God didn't say, well, since you doubt your speaking abilities, I guess I'm done with you. He said, okay, well, we'll get there, but until then, we'll let Aaron speak. There will be methods of witnessing that's not meant for everybody. I don't believe every individual is required to knock on doors. I don't believe every person is going to walk up to complete strangers and pray for them. I do know several preachers who have this confidence and boldness and ability. My brother is one of them. I have seen him walk up to a complete stranger near a set of train tracks and talk to him, pray with him, and invite him to church. I know an individual who convinced a homeless person that even though he was homeless, he was still being watched over by God. Now, this man told him there's no way because he was the one gathering up the cans and soda tabs to turn in for money, not God. But a week later, he came back and said, you were right, because this whole week I couldn't find a single can in sight. God has been providing them the whole time. While everybody may not be bold enough to do these things, I do believe we are called to live a life of example, to be visibly separate and holy. I do believe we should be living a life that speaks for itself when we cannot find the words. I also believe we should be able to answer questions when they are asked of us. So we've all heard the saying, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. Like Moses, if God desires us for public speaking, he will make a way. He will give us the boldness. He will set us on the path that he wants us to be on. Just as my pastor kept calling on me to sing and testify, even though it felt like it was crushing my soul and I wanted to drop into the floor, eventually I grew through that. I grew into that. Sometimes we have to start small. We can't expect a shy teenager to get up and preach a 45-minute sermon, but we can have them teach a couple peers in a Sunday school class for about 5 minutes and help them grow into that. We won't get there. We won't get them there if we condemn them for their anxiety over public speaking. I didn't start leading worship from day one. I began a little solo as a child. And I can tell you for a fact that if that one time that I messed up terribly and forgot the rest of the song, if my pastor had said, well, you know what? I don't think you should get up here until you've perfected that, so you need to take some time off the platform, I never would have sang again. But because he was encouraging through the mess ups, I am where I am today. Preachers don't become preachers overnight. I have seen the growth of multiple preachers go from a 5-minute, very awkward sermon that felt like an eternity to them, I'm sure, to now preaching excellent evangelistic messages. I watched my brother go from a preacher at 16 years old to the incredible pastor he is now. I can go back to listen to my father's first messages and compare those to now, and there's definitely a difference. If you told me when I was 10 to 15 that I would be able to play the piano and sing and speak in front of people, I would say you were absolutely crazy. If you said I would not only be a Sunday school teacher, but the youth leader's wife and the children's ministry director, I would say you're certifiably insane. If you had said I would be raising 4 children in truth, I'd definitely call you a liar because 4 children was never a part of my equation. But here I am because people made way for me. They gave me the chance to grow without having to be perfect and excellent 100% of the time, or that I had to meet perfection before I could sing, or before I could teach a class, or before I could get up and testify or stand in the pulpit. People ignored my mistakes and supported me despite my faults. And of course, God helped me along the way. So, what I learned through the years about social anxiety and how to manage it is that not everyone is going to like you. You won't be everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. There will be people who do like you and do enjoy the cup of tea that you bring to the table. Jesus himself was perfect, yet he was still rejected by many. If he wasn't liked by everyone, why would we think that we would be? People's opinions of us are fleeting, as are our opinions of them, but God's love is constant. Galatians 1:10 says, "For do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I yet pleased men, I should not be the servant of Christ." When we stop striving for universal approval and instead focus on pleasing God, we experience freedom. Practical ways to incorporate faith into overcoming social anxiety include praying before social interactions, asking God for peace and confidence, memorizing scripture, speaking God's word over your fears, leaning on community, surrounding yourself with supportive, faith-filled people. Now, that may not be a ton of people. It may just be 1 or 2, and that's okay. Stepping out in faith, trusting God to guide you in social situations, trusting that if you get in the position of speaking to lots of people, trusting that he's going to give you the words that he wants you to say. Social anxiety can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to control your life. Some psychological strategies to think of is, as we've talked about before, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. This is one of the most effective treatments for social anxiety. CBT helps reframe negative thoughts and build confidence in social situations. It's as simple as just inwardly telling your mind, this is okay, this is normal. Talking to people is normal. Being in groups is normal. There's nothing to be afraid of. Another method is exposure therapy. Gradually exposing yourself to feared social situations in a controlled way can desensitize your brain's fear response. I was afraid to get up and sing, but I did it and did it and did it. And little by little, it does get better. It may not completely go away, but it does get better. You expose yourself to those moments where you feel anxious about being in a social situation. Another method is breathing and relaxation. Deep breathing, mindfulness, and grounding exercises can help you stay calm in social settings. However, I'm going to insert this in there. Be careful. We're going to get into the topic of yoga and meditation and those things in another episode, of course, but be careful when it comes to grounding exercises and grounding techniques. When I say this, I mean just making your mind stop for a second and go, hey, it's not as bad as you feel like it is. That being said, there are techniques that relate to yoga and other grounding exercises that start to verge a little bit on new age, and we want to be careful of those. But moving on, the next thing I would tell you to do is challenge negative thoughts. Ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? Often our fears are exaggerated and unlikely to come true. One thing I tell myself regularly is the worst they can do is say no. And I know for people with social anxiety, it's like, well, no is kind of a bad thing. That's a horrible feeling. But you get to a point where you realize that people saying no is not the end of the world. It saves you from things down the road. It saves you from bad relationships. It saves you from awkward situations. Sometimes no is the best thing people can say. And finally, practice, practice, practice. Start with small social interactions and build up to more challenging ones. So, if social anxiety is something that you struggle with, I want you to know that overcoming it or even managing it is possible. It takes time, effort, and sometimes even professional help, but you're not stuck. God created you with a purpose, and He doesn't want fear to hold you back from living a full, meaningful life. And the purpose that He created for you, I promise you, He will make that happen. Yes, we have to be willing, but if we're struggling with social anxiety, He's going to help us get over that when we pray. If we're struggling with finances and that's hindering our ability to do what God called us to do, I can promise you, when we pray about it, He's going to take care of it. So just remember, God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of peace and of love and of a sound mind. So thank you for joining me today on Hope for the Mind. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to share it with a friend who might need encouragement. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And until next time, take care of your mind, take care of your soul, and take care of yourself.